Hello and welcome to the formal debate on gift giving for Ball State University Spring 2018, Class 619, Section 817. We've chosen a formal debate in which one team will present argument supporting the ethical guidelines of not accepting gifts from clients. The other team will oppose the current guidelines. On our team, we have Anna, Tracy, Liz, and myself. Background for gift giving debate: the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code for Behavior Analysts 1.06D is regarding multiple relationships and conflicts of interest, and 2.14 is regarding referrals and fees. 1.06D states that behavior analysts do not accept any gifts from or give any gifts to clients because this constitutes a multiple relationship. Behavior analysts must not receive or provide money, gifts, or other enticements for any professional referrals. There are various bodies involved in ethics, and particularly dual relationships, that will be discussed in this debate, as can be seen in Figure 1 by Scapelletti and Associates from 2004. First, we will hear from Anna, our pro-stater.
The position of the pro side of this gift giving debate is to uphold the decision of the BACB in keeping gifts out of ethical practice. Although there are arguments that gifts do not always constitute a multiple relationship, there's no reason to complicate the relationship we have with clients by giving or receiving any gifts. An article by Weher in 2001 titled "No, Gifts Debase the True Value of Care," published in the Western Journal of Medicine, explains 4 specific reasons that as medical providers, those who are certified by the Behavior Analyst Board should not accept any gifts. First, the article says that profiting from the treatment of patients other than through established reimbursement schemes violates the physician's fidelity to the patient. Accepting gifts erodes the special moral character of the physician-patient relationship. This is basically saying that after we establish rates of payment, we cannot accept more profit by means of gifts. As professionals, our rates should be fair, and any increase in rate should be through a contract. Second, Weher goes on to say that gifts are given with differing motivations, and it may be difficult for the physician to divine the reason for a particular act of gift giving. Now we'll see visual 1A. Basically, this says, I know you think you're being generous, but gift giving is reciprocity, and you're just giving me something to do. What a gift means to one person does not necessarily mean the same to the next. As behavior analysts, we cannot assume to know the function of a client's gift-giving behavior, even if the term gift is used in our culture with the connotation that nothing is expected in return. Third, the article states, even if a gift is given with purely altruistic motivations, other patients may perceive the act of giving gifts differently. If other patients suspect that the gift bearer is receiving preferential treatment, they in return may attempt to purchase the physician's favor with even more expensive gifts. Here we'll see visual 1B. Although all ABA treatment is individualized, it would be bad practice to have clients attempting to gain special treatment by giving gifts. So, you get a gift, you get a gift, you get a gift, everybody gets a gift. That can be tough in a real practice. Fourth, Weher finishes with the idea that gift giving debases the true value of care that physicians give to their patients. The gift of life is simply too precious to be acknowledged by a bottle of scotch, no matter the make or vintage. More meaningful and appropriate ways exist to express gratitude, such as a heartfelt thank you, a letter recounting the family's joy. These gestures mean so much more than a gift precisely because they cannot be purchased. Although this is written for physicians, BCBAs are out to save the world, one person at a time. And receiving a gift can debase the goal we set out to accomplish, which is for our clients to gain skills they may not have acquired without treatment. If we allow clients to try to thank us with monetary purchases, where does it end? In short, we can't profit outside of the agreed upon rates. We can't assume to know the motivation of a client's gift-giving behavior. Other clients may see it as a way to gain preferential treatment, and the job that we do cannot be repaid by gifts of any price.
Thank you, Anna. Next, we will hear from our constater, Tracy.
Okay. So the position of the con side is that the behavior of gift giving, just like any behavior, is not inherently bad. We argue that there is indeed a time and a place for it, and there should be regulations on gift giving in the professional codes. However, currently the professional codes rely on the idea that gift giving is bad because it creates multiple, also known as dual, relationships. This is the true heart of the issue of the gift giving debate. Our goal here is to address these underlying assumptions of the ethical code. First, the single-minded viewpoint that multiple relationships will inevitably end with harm and that the only ethical recourse to deal with multiple relationships is simply to avoid them. In addressing the above, the con proposes that there's a lack of research into the specificity of how multiple relationships affect the BCBA client relationships, specifically in the field of applied behavior analysis and long-term therapy. Much of the ethical literature relies on anecdotal horror stories. We'd also like to challenge that long-held assumption that multiple relationships negatively affect our objectivity and create a conflict of interest. Looking a little bit closely at clinician interviews and experiences, this is currently contradicted in practice as BCBA and clients successfully navigate these dual relationships in many small, isolated communities. And many of those practitioners argue that these multiple relationships can still remain professional and even benefit the client. Lastly, consider not only how these relationships affect us as professionals, but how they affect and or benefit the client, particularly in terms of social and cultural inclusion. In sum, refusing to participate in a very natural social practice of gift giving and in the grander scheme, not truly acknowledging and addressing the inevitability of multiple relationships, we can negatively affect our clients, inhibit their progress, and worse, leave clinicians who do experience difficulties with these situations with no other recourse for dealing with these potential issues except avoiding the problem. And as many of us who have had experience, simply avoiding a problem doesn't usually end in its disappearance, much less its resolution. So some of the main points we're going to go through in the later section is going to be the real issue of multiple relationships. We're going to take a closer look at a case study of smaller, isolated, usually rural communities that successfully navigate multiple relationships. And third, cultural considerations and how these may constitute discrimination based on cultural practices, another of our BACB codes, 1.05. Some of the research we're going to refer to are a couple of case studies by Brownlee, Pantalone, Ganoia, and Wright, and Otis. A couple of reviews that have gone through the literature, Burgard, Cotone, Molesky, and Skoko, Capelli, and Spence. And also a couple of the articles that we've read in class, Tedefore, Sinclair, and Fallender, and Nuringer.
Thank you, Tracy. Now we will go back to Anna, our pro-Kruger.
Wayher brought up some great points as to why healthcare professionals cannot accept gifts. This is consistent with the BACB compliance code, which states in section 2.12, contracts, fees, and financial agreements, that as early as is feasible in a professional scientific relationship, behavior analysts reach an agreement with their clients specifying compensation and billing agreements. It also says that behavior analysts' fee practices are consistent with law and behavior analysts do not misrepresent their fees. If limitations to services can be anticipated because of limitations in funding, this is discussed with the client as early as is feasible. This is just reiterating Weir's point that we cannot profit from a client outside of the agreed upon rate. Although it may seem innocuous to accept a gift, it is a way to profit profit, and the code is clear in its statement against this. There's another article, or a book actually, it's by Dilio, published in 2000, Ethical Thinking in Music Therapy, and he discussed the various meaning behind gifts. It is important to consider the cultural background of the client offering the gift, as gifts have different meanings in some non-Western cultures. It's true, we don't always know what the intention of someone's gift is, even if we are knowledgeable about their culture. As behavior analysts, it's our job to learn some of our clients' cultural norms, but it should not be expected that we participate in them if it's against our ethical code. Going back to we here, we may not know the motivation behind giving a gift, but if gift giving is important to a client because of their culture, we can teach the skills around gift giving and allow them to practice giving gifts to more appropriate people in their lives, like peers, family, and others that will be a part of their natural environment. To further discuss the idea of preferential treatment, the way here discusses, if another client sees us accepting a gift from a person, they will not be culturally aware of the other client, and it may mean something different to them. With all the HIPAA protection we have for our patients, the other clients should not know what the cultural backgrounds are, and it may have significance in their culture. This could present difficulties and distrust between the behavior analyst and different clients due to the assumed favoritism for clients. This is not discussing gifts that have no monetary value from children or adults who do not have the cognitive ability to understand refusal of gifts. In this, I mean coloring pages, cards, arts and crafts that cannot be assigned a monetary value. What we cannot accept are gifts that create multiple relationships, including gift cards, food items, and other items that come with a receipt. Once we have set up our agreed upon prices, no further reimbursement can be given or taken. It can be as clear cut as that.
Thank you, Anna. Now we will go back to Tracy, our con prover.
So going back to our first point about dual and multiple relationships, I really want to look into how there's a lack of evidence and research specific to how dual relationships are harmful in an ABA population to either the BCBA, the therapists, or the clients. There are many of these studies in nursing and mental health, social work, but none of these fields exactly mirror our own, and in particular, the BCBA therapist-client relationships. In many ways, the field reflects an educational field as much as a medical one, especially in our day-to-day caseloads, and this is especially true when working with children. There isn't enough of understanding of ABA in this way, not as a long-term service provider, not as one that may and frequently does operate in the home environment, and not one that has changed so frequently in the past couple decades, especially now that ABA services are becoming more widespread and available, and awareness of these services are increasing. There's always been this assumption of a dual relationship that there's a slippery slope, that there's no space to inhabit besides the top of the hill or the bottom. Dual or multiple relationships are considered to have a negative connotation, and historically, this makes sense because they're often associated with client exploitation and particularly sexual transgressions. Now, while sexual concerns are backed up by research and generally undisputed, non-sexual relationships, as Burgoyd points out, are not as clear. A lot of times we hear these anecdotal horror stories, examples of when things have gone wrong, but we can argue just as many that have gone right. This isn't good, supported, research-based evidence. A lot of the case studies, if you look at the literature, many argue for and provide examples of relationships with clients that are actually beneficial to the client's well-being, their emotional adjustment and social adjustment. Social being of special importance to our ASD population. So the argument here is that when they're appropriately monitored, dual relationships can not only have a therapeutic value, but avoiding them altogether can actually have a detrimental effect on our clients. This brings me to the point that our ethical code falls short. When things do go wrong, it doesn't provide advice about how to navigate these situations. And things do go wrong. Half of the complaints and lawsuits filed against therapists address a lot of concerns related to dual relationships. So obviously things do happen, and our code of simply avoiding this doesn't prevent those things from happening. And so we need to learn to navigate these situations. So we have to acknowledge that there's a continuum of dual relationships from destructive, but also to therapeutic. And a lot of codes have begun to do this outside of the field of ABA. In our Pettifor, Sinclair, and Fallender article, we read about how the Universal Declaration of Universal Declaration of Ethical Principles for Psychologists. This is a quote from the article about this new ethical code. It stimulated considerable global dialogue on ethics, is having an effect on the revision of existing codes of ethics, and shows promise as an aid in ethical decision making and resolving ethical dilemmas with less need for reliance on specific rules. So this relates specifically to the gift giving rule. It's a very specific, avoid them at all costs. But in this case, we need to do more than just simply avoiding them. There is also the Code of Professional Ethics for Rehabilitation Counselors. And this was the first professional ethical code in mental health profession to abandon the term dual relationships. Cotone explains that this was because it's too ambiguous. It's not enough specific context. The term lacks any real benefits to the code. It's just a lump sum term. So the Code of Professional Ethics for Rehabilitation Counselors has actually split relationships between, in this case, counselors and their clients into three different kinds. Sexual romantic relationships, which we can very clearly, as we said before, non-disputed, avoid those. Non-professional relationships and contiguous professional relationships. So looking at that table of OTIS, we can kind of see a couple of different examples that codes have taken on gift giving in nurses and caregivers, psychotherapists, and psychiatrists. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the fact is here that other codes are adapting and providing more specific advice on how to deal with gift giving. And the field of ABA needs to adapt as well, and the BCBA should take into consideration that our code needs to be expanded in this respect. To kind of wrap up this one point, this is a quote from one of the reviews from Brown-Lee. We wonder whether we as practitioners, in our attempts to protect ourselves and our profession, have enacted barriers that separate us from our clients to their potential detriment. Moving on to that second point about a case study for small isolated communities. This is a really good example because dual multiple relationships in small rural communities are usually inevitable. Multiple of the articles reference how avoiding these kinds of relationships will make life extremely difficult in small isolated communities. Everyday dual relationships are a predictable part of rural mental health care practice. Further research is required to really identify the benefits and problems in any kind of clinical or practice resulting from non-sexual dual relationships. A general ban on dual relationships is not the answer. There are no specific guidelines in the ethical code that reflect the reality of rural or remote practice, especially with respect to managing these relationships. Professionals are left to use their own decision-making skills to ethically provide services to clients. Beauregard goes on to say that a different set of ethical guidelines may apply in less densely populated areas. Research offers compelling evidence that rural practice is qualitatively different from urban practice when it comes to ethics of dual relationships. In a lot of these isolated communities, there are limited service providers in these areas. So there's a lot of different cultural things going on within these smaller communities. And we shouldn't just limit these ideas in considering only the small rural communities, though they do provide a good example. We argue that we should extend these ideas across the board because America is a prime example of how multiple cultures and communities and sub-communities, even in a dense city, that these kind of issues can still be present. The last thing we want to consider is cultural practices. According to Bailey and Birch, the kind of guiding ethical force in our field, Community standards, laws, prevailing philosophies, and individual freedoms determine ethical procedures in behavior analysis. Taking the statement from Bailey and Birch, this is exactly what we should be doing in our example of the rural communities. In these rural communities, community members expect more from professionals. They expect professionals to be engaged members of that community. You can't maintain a distance as a neutral, detached professional because this obstructs a building of trust and runs counter to those local expectations. Refusing a gift in these situations could offend a patient. There's also the idea of matched minorities, ethnically and linguistic minorities. Clients tend to feel more comfortable seeking professionals who share their own cultural group. And in those cases, you can't simply avoid the complications that are inherent in the clinician-client relationship. You can't necessarily reiterate our code to clients. We can reiterate our code to clients all day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll understand them and that their feelings and well-being won't be affected by it. They come to us for help, and we can't simply put up barriers in the risk of losing these clients and their trust in seeking help again, especially in these isolated communities where there aren't very many service providers. Come back around to our ethical code. This is referring to Pettifor, Sinclair, and Fallender, the article that we read. The underlying philosophies and worldviews of Western codes tend to reflect Western philosophies and worldviews which emphasize the individual, personal independence, and boundaries between persons. Now, in contrast, the philosophies and worldviews of non-Western countries that adopted only slightly adapted Western developed ethics codes tend to emphasize community, family, interdependence, and connections between people. You can actually see an example of this in some of the Scottish and Ireland Board of Behavior Analysts that have actually rejected the code about gift giving because it's such an inherent part of their culture and community. If any of you have even heard of Behavior Babe, she's a BCBA. She has her own personal website, and the BACB actually invited her to do some ethics for the Relias ethics modules. Some of you may have seen them. She gives the example of Hawaii and the exchange of food. She argues that in situations where gift giving, such as flowers and fruit, is culturally acceptable, one could argue a dual relationship doesn't even exist. The main point here that reiterates what Nuringer says is that ethics codes rely on objectivity, but objectification of behavior should be the standard only so far as it is functional. Empathy may turn out to be as functional in the experimental analysis of behavior as it is in human social interactions. So just to wrap it up, this Scopopelli figure 1, it kind of outlines the responsibilities of the different levels of client-clinician interface: personal body, service, clinician, and patient. The one I really want to focus on here is professional bodies, in that they are supposed to provide professional advice for protection of patient and clinician. But our ethical code falls somewhat short of this because they don't provide for dealing with dual relationships. They only say to avoid them. So just to reiterate our 3 main points of the con side is that the real issue in gift giving is that of multiple relationships, and that the BCBA ethics code is less than satisfactory in this case. 2 is that we want to take a look at smaller rural communities as an example, and 3, take into cultural considerations. The last thing I want to leave you with is a quote by Pettifor, Sinclair, and Fallender. Treating ethical rules as immutable ends in themselves, separating them from the ethical ideas, the principles and virtues they were designed to reflect and support, can turn rules into obstacles rather than facilitators of ethical ideas, such as respect, fairness, caring, benevolence, and avoidance of harm. Rules and ideas sometimes conflict, and that psychologists need to have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to harmonize them. And this is what the Consides proposes that the BACB ethics code is not doing for us. We need something more.
Thank you, Tracy. Now we will hear from Liz, our pro attacker.
My first point I want to point out is the assumption that all dual relationships are bad or will lead to a slippery slope. But many have argued for and provided examples of relationships with clients that were beneficial to the client's well-being, emotional adjustment, and social adjustment. To go back on that slippery slope, there's a quote in Bailey and Birch ethics book, and the quote states, in some professions, there is an understanding that small gifts that value less than $10 do not present a problem unless they lead to manipulation, which we interpret to mean there is an expectation of some reciprocation, which then produces the aforementioned slippery slope. This also points to the fact that while some people may think certain things can be acceptable as gifts, like small candies or flowers or cards, if the value is expected to be returned, a slippery slope can occur. The next point I want to go back on is point 1C, the continuum of dual relationships from destructive to therapeutic. I wanted to ask why or how does dual relationships turn therapeutic, or what happens if something bad happens? There's an example in the 2016 version of Bailey and Birch, case study 1.06. The example illustrates that a graduate student was pressured into accepting token gifts from a family. She resisted, but her supervisor told her to accept it. Later, something bad happened, and the family and agent filed a complaint against her. The next one I want to go through is in evidence number 3, and the first point is refusing gifts may offend the patient. Bailey and Birch state that once trying to determine the value of a gift becomes part of the practice. The behavior analyst must face the uncomfortable situation of returning certain gifts because they exceeded the limit to some clients, but not to others. What constitutes a gift as being safe? Low value and safe can mean different things based on social or economic class. Something worth $10 can mean very different things for different families. Like pictures of patients, like portraits versus snapshots on their phone. Patients, arts and crafts, snacks, meals, gift cards, flowers, etc. The third thing I wanted to point out was the Declaration of Professional Practice by Bailey and Birch, the 2011 version. The behavior analyst abides by the stated declaration. It states that we are in your home to provide treatment to your child. We are not guests and do not expect to be treated as such. We have to abide by professional practices in our country. Please do not offer us food or drink or expect that you should give gifts or tokens of appreciation. We derive all of our rewards from the improvements that your child will show as a result of treatment. And an occasional thank you is more than enough.
Thank you, Liz. Now I will be the con-attacker. Okay, in point 1, the BACB Compliance Code 2.12, Contract Fees and Financial Agreements. The definition of a gift is something giving, a thing given willingly to someone without payment, a present. This does not alter the agreed upon fee for services because it is not considered a payment, nor is it expected for the client to give a gift to receive continued services. Behavior analysts do not make assumptions about the function of the behavior. We cannot assume that a gift is given in lieu of a payment or with the expectation to receive something in return. There are various meanings behind gifts, and each culture, we do not know what those meanings are, so we have to understand that if a client is given a gift, then we have to go back to not being offensive and understanding their cultures at the same time. Back to the HIPAA and cultural differences. While it was stated that we cannot accept gifts because somebody would not understand what the cultural background of that client would be, that we also cannot, we would not change a client's program because of one ethical culture would not find a treatment program acceptable to them. So we have to treat each client individually, and we cannot look at everybody has to be treated equally in these aspects. Gifts are gifts. If you state that we can accept a gift that have no monetary value from children or adults, do not have the cognitive ability to understand the refusal of gifts, then why would we not be able to accept a gift from another client? Would other clients not feel the same way as stated earlier, that there may be some favoritism going on? For our closing statements, ethics are never black or white. Oftentimes there are many shades of gray in between, and that's from Behavior Bay. The code is very definitive, no gifts. Is there room for change? We believe there is. We need a better understanding, and we need to know, like we discussed in the rural areas, that the dual relationships, Oates and Associates advocate for a routine procedure of reflection with others, such as supervisors. Professional ethics codes should provide positive guidance on the matter of dual relationships and not just give negative, inhibitory, or preventative standards. Decision-making model addressing the ethics of dual relationships are restricted to considerations of whether to enter a dual relationship rather than how to manage such a relationship. And we'll go back to our table here of how other professions are working on what to do with these dual relationship types of situations. We will now go to our questions. Our first question is, what are some preventative strategies you can use to help clients, including parents and or others, not offer to provide you as a professional behavior analyst gifts? And first we'll hear from Liz.
Parents or client handbooks that state clearly what the expectations are regarding gift giving and receiving, it is not allowed. And cite BACB ethical guidelines 06 have a clear declaration of professional practices and procedures for behavior analysts, which would also indicate that gifts will not be accepted due to the BACB ethical guidelines 1.06.
Tracy?
Speaking for the con side, some of the preventative strategies that we can help is talking about informed consent. It's not just preventing gifts in general, but just having this conversation with our clients often. Doesn't necessarily have to mean that we have to have the conversation, no gifts, absolutely not at all, but maybe have the conversation that gifts are given willingly, and that they are in no way part of services and or fees, and then also cannot be used for rebuttal or retribution against the therapists. And they can also waive their rights in terms of that, or sign an important contract stating that if they do decide to give gifts, that they are in no way expecting the reciprocation, and that in no way affects services, and that they also cannot use the gift as evidence for something that happens later. And this way, we basically take the position that most legal proceedings state.
Thank you. What might be some aversive consequences that can occur if you accept a small gift, example, a glass of water or a $5 gift card? For example, what happens if a parent gives you a gift that you accept, but 6 months later the parent decides they're unhappy with the services you are providing and starts to seek out retribution? Anna?
Well, if a client comes back after giving a gift and is unhappy with their services, They could claim that we broke the agreed upon contract of services, and in the worst case scenario, the board could take action against the behavior analyst on the case and revoke their certification for unethical practice. And that's obviously worst case scenario, but these are aversive consequences that can occur if you accept gifts.
Thank you. Okay, this is based on the assumption of the slippery slope. While this is a possibility, it's not an inevitability. This example is a large over-exaggeration. In reality, you should deal with each situation discreetly. This would again involve informed consent on the start of services and making sure parents understand that any gifts given or accepted are separate from services and are voluntary. We propose to follow the same consequences that occur in legal practice. Example, if you cannot seek retribution for items that are considered gifts, this comes back to the understanding of services. Okay, do you have any personal experience related to this topic that you would like to share? Liz?
I do have a personal experience at the center I'm currently at. We have parents all the time that bring in goodies, flowers, cupcakes, and things like that for the therapist's birthdays. So in our center, all the goodies kind of stay in a neutral area, like the kitchen, and nothing is taken home. We just kind of share everything as one.
Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, my experience is pretty similar to Liz's. For our clinic, many of our parents, our school modeled environment is the only school that many of our clients know. And so when birthdays come around, the parents want to be able to bring in cupcakes and things for the classroom and for the therapist to celebrate as well. And a lot of clinics find ways around this, such as the way that Liz suggests about keeping them in a common area and not being able to take them home. But inherently, even that is not something that the code allows for. And that's kind of my point, that the code doesn't encompass enough different variations of what should be done in these situations. Clinics are finding certain ways around that when they do see it as an acceptable and appropriate participation in gift giving, such as for clients' birthdays. So the code should be updated to reflect this.
Thank you. What are some complications that still occur despite the ethical guideline? Anna?
Despite the clear ethical code, some families will still bring in items, most often food, like we heard from the previous question, and we'll just find loopholes around them, around the board certified people accepting the gift. So what I've seen most is that an admin person will accept the gift and then put the food out. So that's a complication with the ethical guideline, and it is something that is happening, like we heard from the question before.
Thank you. As the con side mentioned in the debate, most of the ethical complaints filed with the BACB are related to multiple relationships. So despite the ban on them, they are still very common and pose a significant issue that we all need to learn to deal with ethically and competently. Okay, if the preventative strategies do not work, what do you do? Liz?
If the preventative strategies don't work, we would redirect to a more appropriate way to express our gratitude, like donating to a charity or scanning in a handwritten card, things among those natures.
We've also had issues where families have tried to give gifts, and we've expressed other ways that they could show their gratitude, charities. Sometimes we have donation drives that they can give to for different, like the homeless children in the area. Sometimes we've just had to return gifts. We had one family try to sneak in a bunch of gift cards and just place them on the admin's desk. Well, we knew the family enough that we could identify where the gift cards came from. So we were able to return it to say, that was clearly against our ethical guidelines. Are there any clear benefits to accepting or receiving gifts? Anna?
In supporting the compliance code, the pro side of this debate says no.
Tracy?
Speaking for the con side, we think that there can be many benefits to accepting and receiving gifts. As we mentioned earlier in the debate, there's a continuum of multiple relationships that do have a therapeutic end. While more research is kind of needed to really determine these benefits, some possible ones could include that clients are more trusting, have a better well-being, are more socially adjusted, various cultures could be respected, clients may make more progress. We're being inclusive of minorities, professionals are participating as members of the community, and just for us, our professional and personal lives are more balanced. So while I said there's a lot more research to talk about a little bit more specifically what kind of therapeutic ends could be there, there is a couple of possibilities that we can consider.
I would like to thank you all for listening to our debate on the ethical guidelines regarding gift giving. We will go back to the guideline does state that gift giving is a no. We do not accept or give gifts. And we work very hard with our patients and clients to follow those guidelines. And thank you for your attention.